Our web seminar today, New Driver Hires, PSP Reports, and the Impact on CSA Scores, with attorney Doug Marcello as our guest speaker. This KCI-sponsored session will last approximately 20 minutes. We'll try to cover the material as efficiently as possible. A question and answer session will be available at the conclusion of your presentation. Before we begin, a few important tips about your web seminar technology. Your lines have been muted for the duration of the webinar. You can ask questions at any time through your question box. Use the arrow or orange arrow to open and close the box. Do not click the black X. We encourage you to ask questions during the web seminar. We'll queue them up and answer as many as possible at the end. You can listen to the web seminar on your telephone or on your speaker or headset. Please don't try to listen to both at the same time. It's my pleasure now to introduce Doug Marcello, trucking law attorney. He's earned his commercial driver's license, very active in the trucking industry, membership in TIDA, ATA, Safety and Management, PMTA, etc. Located in Central Pennsylvania Trucking Hub, and he represents trucking cases throughout the country. Doug, please take it away.
Thank you, Alan. Quality drivers are vital to any trucking company. Driver safety, performance, and customer relations have been key components of successful companies. Today we'll discuss several aspects of hiring in the trucking industry. First, we'll talk about the driver pre-employment screening program. We'll then look at the CSA considerations with regard to hiring. And finally, we'll talk about hiring in today's environment, an environment that has become very litigious and in which hiring is another component. Hiring drivers has always been a challenge. The advent of CSA makes it even more important today. This new scoring system will make your company responsible for the roadside violations of your drivers. More importantly, your company will have to live with their points for 2 years, even if that driver leaves your company. This added element makes your hiring decisions even more important. In any business, the decision as to whom to hire is always a challenging decision. No matter how thorough the review of a person's background or how extensive the interview, hiring is never a matter of certainty. It is at best a matter of reviewing the available information, applying your experience, and making your best judgment as to quality and fit of the applicant. Today we're going to review the resources available to trucking companies in making your hiring decisions. We will examine the newest component, the pre-employment screening program, as well as traditional means such as MVR reports. We're also going to take a look at what you can do to address potential weaknesses of a candidate in an effort to solidify their ability in those particular areas. Finally, we will address and talk about the issue of negligent hiring claims and lawsuits. Let's start with the newest hiring resource available to the trucking industry, the Pre-Employment Screening Program, PSP. Moderator, I was wondering if you could put up the first polling program so we can get an idea of how many of our listeners are currently using PSP.
Very good, attorney. PSP, we have the poll launched. I'm sorry to interrupt. We have the poll launched. We encourage the audience to vote. We'll keep this poll open for about 10 seconds. Excuse me.
Super. Not at all. Thanks, Alan. PSP is a tool that provides a driver's records from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's data system called the Motor Carrier Management Information System, MCMIS. The MCMIS is a database taken from roadside inspection reports. In addition to the results of roadside inspections, it also contains crash data with regard to the drivers. Now, one thing that is sometimes overlooked or misunderstood, PSP is not part of CSA. It is a totally separate program. However, it has been associated with CSA, and it's understood why. It utilizes the same database, the MCMIS we just spoke of, as does CSA. More importantly, PSP, by using that database, provides prospective employers with the applicant's past record in the areas that will be scored in CFA if that driver is ultimately hired. A key note, the PSP does not replace an MVR. This is not the same information as found on an MVR. The MVR contains all moving violations of a CDL driver. The PSP contains all roadside inspection violations of a CDL driver. The PSP will not contain moving violations unless the violation was associated with a roadside inspection. For example, many states require probable cause to stop a commercial motor vehicle, some type of violation separate and apart from the need to inspect or the desire to inspect. You will frequently see moving violations associated with roadside inspections on those reports. The PSP provides information in a report that's called a Driver Information Resource Record, DIR. The DIR will contain 3 years of roadside inspection data from the FMCSA's NCMIS database, the same source that generates the information for the CSA scoring. It will also contain 5 years of a driver's crash data. Now, as in most aspects of today's life, the first thing you need to know about PSP is how to get there. And how to get there, as in today's world, requires a website. There is the website for the PSP program. This is what you'll need to go to and begin the process of accessing PSP. Once you get access, how do you get a DIR report? Well, first, you must register your company with the PSP system. And there are 2 ways to do this. Your company may register directly with PSP. When you do so, your company will be permitted up to 10 users with the basic registration fee. There's a couple fees involved with this. There's an annual fee and there is a per report charge. The annual fee for small companies, those with less than 100 power units, is $25 per year. For larger companies, those having more than 100 power units, it's $100 a year. For each individual DIR, driver report, that you request, there is a $10 charge for each record. Once you PSP program, you'll receive a username and a password. With the driver's consent, with that username and password, you can access a DIR, record of a driver, online 24/7. You may request multiple drivers at one time, again, with the consent and approval of each driver. Now, an alternative from registering directly with PSP is for your company to use a third-party provider. Your company would register through the third-party provider, and the fees and costs that you would be charged would be subject to and determined by that same third-party provider. This gives you an overview of the financial and registration requirements for PSP. Procedurally, the first step before you attempt to access a report is to obtain the driver's written consent. This is a requirement. It is vital to do so. There is a template of a consent form available in the enrollment package, which can be found online at the PSP website, which is posted www.psp.fmcsa.dot.gov. A driver may obtain a copy of their DIR, their record, as well as a company. For a driver, there is no registration fee. There is a $10 record report fee for the driver, and the driver may request this information at any time. If a driver reviews their record and says that or finds that there is incorrect information reported in there, they may challenge the content of the DIR, their record, just as a company would, through use of the data queue system. Use of the DIR information, it's important to note, it may be only used by a carrier as part of the hiring process. This is not a report you can request for a currently or ongoing employed driver. There are private companies that mine the data and provide reports of your company on an individual driver basis through access to the basic data bank used by CSA. That is not an option with PSP. That is not a proper use of PSP. It is only for pre-hiring consideration. The DIR report, the driver's report, gives you the ability to analyze a candidate for hiring from a CSA perspective. It will provide you with the information from roadsides and from crashes, the very components of CSA scoring. These points will not come on to your company score, but once that driver is with you, their performance in these areas will be on your record and in your score for 2 years. Let me suggest some thoughts for analyzing a DIR from the CSA perspective. First, look at the applicant's performance in the CSA key point, those areas in which CSA has found to have had the highest levels of scoring. I recently was a panelist at the American Trucking Association Safety Conference in Rogers, Arkansas. One of the panels at that conference included a representative from one of the companies that provides data services to carriers to help them evaluate their CSA score and data and review the drivers and manage them. That representative provided some insight as to CSA point generators that I wanted to pass on to you to consider when you look at a DIR and make your hiring decision. The data representative related a number of findings. First, he said if they had a mantra as to CSA point generators based upon their review and working with the data for hundreds of companies, it would be logs, lamps, and speeding. These items are by far the greatest point generators. Logs, incomplete, mistakenly completed, errors, or hours of service issue. Lamps, a euphemism for the obvious visual defects of a vehicle that resulted in it pulled over and undergoing a full inspection. Speeding, it speaks for itself. He also noted that in August, according to their calculation, in dealing with the computers that they use to analyze the data, there were probably more than 1,000 changes made in the CSA scoring system. And as a result of those changes, fatigued driving, hours of service, and logging issues are by far the greatest area of focus of the CSA scoring, with all other basics tied for second place. Also, in analyzing their data, they find that between 6 and 8% of drivers result in 85% of the CSA points. They also noted that inspections are usually performed for one of 3 reasons. Number 1, a moving violation. Number 2, an observable defect on the vehicle, a light out, a missing mud flap, something like that. And number 3, everything else, be it a high ISS score, aggressive enforcement in that area, any other reason. Of those 3 reasons for an inspection, the first 2 reasons they consider to be within the control of the driver, a moving violation or an observable defect of the vehicle. Those 2 items account for about 20% of the inspections, yet those inspections and 2 items account for 80 points. In your hiring decisions, look at these areas of the DIR, the driving record from PSP, in your considerations. Has the driver accumulated points in these areas, moving violations, log violations, or observable equipment violations that may be indicative of an adequate pre-tripping by the driver? On the DIR report are of the type that a driver would encounter with your type of operation. A flatbed driver faces more potential for securement points, for example, than would a box trailer driver. Let me give one last comment on the PSP. A company is not required to request a DIR through the PSP program. However, for $10, you have the ability to access this newest research and gain valuable insight as to the driver's past performance, say, perspective. This does not replace the long-used MVR, but it serves as a complement and a valuable insight in this new era. While we're talking about MVRs, you will need to obtain an MVR as you've done in the past. The MVR continues to be a vital part of your hiring process. First and foremost, and probably the most basic, it verifies that the driver is licensed to operate a commercial motor vehicle. Key aspect. Second, it provides the driver's driving history in both their commercial motor vehicle as well as their private vehicle. This information is from citations and warnings issued to drivers at any time, including roadside inspections, but any other time they use a vehicle. Let me give you a heads up if you have drivers who are licensed in Pennsylvania. It used to be when we would request a MVR, you would get a 10-year review, a 10-year history of their motor vehicle record. Recently, I've been told by companies that when they request a CDL MVR from PennDOT, they are receiving a report that dates back to the commencement of the computerization of the system back in the 1970s. The reason I point that out, as you go through the cycle of annual reviews with Pennsylvania drivers, be sure to look beyond the last 12 months to update it, but look at the entire report, because there may be data on there that you have not seen in the past. When reviewing any MVR, apply your insight and experience in terms of evaluating the MVR just as you do today for the safety qualifications of your driver. What are the nature of the violations, the timing of the violations? What are the frequency of the violations that are shown on that MVR? In addition, the MVR provides valuable insight from a CSA perspective. It reflects violations that could result in roadside inspections and thus CSA points. Again, remember, the best way to avoid CSA points is not to have a roadside inspection. The decision whether or not to hire a driver can sometimes be difficult. There may be items on the MVR that give concern, but not enough to disqualify the applicant from consideration. You may find that a driver now has points on his PSP record, the DIR, that cause similar concerns from a CSA perspective. What you might want to do in those circumstances is to consider whether the applicant is a potential candidate for remedial training to address any such issues. Mr. Moderator, could we have the second polling question to see how many companies are currently using remedial training upon new hires?
Absolutely. The poll is launched. We'll keep that poll open 10 seconds.
Thank you, sir. Remedial training, this can take many forms. First, it could involve focused training on an issue of concern that you find either in the MVR or the DIR from the PSP program. That focused training could involve video programs, personalized instruction, online training, or prepared courses. These are all potential sources of remedial training to address a specific issue that you see on these records. With the advent of CSA, a new set of issues have taken heightened importance. These include vehicle maintenance and securement issues. Again, consider individual training by a mechanic or senior driver to convey the necessary information to potential hirees to ensure the necessary compliance when they take to the road. Second, consider a driver trainer for a period of time. This can be a source of training and emphasis on the areas of issues with the candidates. This could also be done in conjunction with the remedial training to both reinforce the lessons and verify their adherence. Third, consider a probation period during which the applicant will be required to demonstrate his or her ability to address issues. Now, the last consideration in terms of hiring, and what I purposely left for last, is hiring from the perspective of litigation. Quote, negligent hiring, unquote, is among the litany of allegations asserted by plaintiffs' attorneys when they file a lawsuit against trucking companies. For them, it is standard equipment in their complaints, along with the complaints of, quote, negligent retention, end quote, and, quote, negligent hiring, unquote, regardless of the specific facts of the case or background of the driver. It imposes a duty on an employer to exercise reasonable care in selecting and controlling employees. What is reasonable care? It's undefined. Ultimately, it is to be decided in a lawsuit by the 12 persons seated in the jury box. Our challenge is to present evidence demonstrating that the driver's hiring was reasonable and that he was a safe driver when he was hired. So why is this the last part of the webinar? Because the best defense of reasonableness is established by following the steps that we've spoken about prior to this in the webinar. Think about it. CSA assigns points based upon what conduct that the FMCSA has determined most likely to result in serious accident. Hiring based upon information in a DIR with the perspective of minimizing CSA points and by logical extension is a hiring decision made in a manner intended to minimize the risk of serious crashes. Similarly, consideration of an MVR is another element in hiring in a reasonable manner. To the extent there are any questionable issues on the PSP or the MVR, remedial training and instruction, and perhaps even follow-up by a driver trainer, provides yet additional proof of and support for the reasonableness of your hiring decision. Each step of the way, your review and the basis upon which you assert the reasonableness of the hire. The PSP, the MVR, and the documentation of the remedial program provide tangible evidence of the reasonableness of your hire. The best defense to negligent hiring is safe hiring. The best proof is documentation. When you are alone in the island of the witness box before 12 jurors, there is no better proof of the reasonableness of your hiring decision and that driver's employment than the documentation that you have made through the procedure we discussed in the hiring process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doug, for that great presentation. We're going to open the floor up for questions and answers right now, and we have many questions from the audience. So I'm going to give the first one. Doug, the first question is, what crash information is provided by a DIR issued by the PSP?
The DIR will provide both a crash summary and crash details. The information for an individual driver includes the number of crashes. It'll provide a breakout of those that involved, if any, fatalities or balanced non-fatalities. It will also tell crashes with injuries or lack of injuries, as well as towaways and hazmat. These are all important because that is the breakout and the points that will be assigned on a CSA score. There's also crash detail information provided on the DIR report as well in terms of the date, carrier name, driver name, license, etc. with regard to the location of the accident.
Thank you, Doug. The next question we have here, when the MASIC scores become public, will the safety ratings still show the present categories such as satisfactory, conditional, etc.?
I think that's still under determination by the FMCSA. There was discussion last week in Rogers at the ATA Safety Conference with regard to how they're going to deal with not just those ratings, but into the future. And a spokesman for the FMCSA indicated that they anticipate publishing proposed rules probably early next year with regard to addressing the safety rating issue.
Thank you. The next question we have, is a DIR record only for CDL drivers?
Yes. The DIR record is only for those who are commercial operators and only for those who have a CDL. That is the record, and those are the individuals who are operating the truck that goes on to the records with regard to the FMCSA. Now, I guess technically a DIR record could be for a non-CDL driver who is driving a commercial vehicle, but that creates a whole other set of issues. So bottom line answer, generally, yeah, it's a CDL driver.
Thank you. Next question. If you're a registered motor carrier, can you order DIRs of current employees if the employee is requesting it?
The answer is no, you cannot do that as the carrier. My understanding from the PSP is that a driver could obtain their own information at any time, either through the PSP program or through a Freedom of Information Act request. The carrier's means of obtaining information from drivers who are currently on board are one of two ways. One is through your review of your CSA data on an incident-by-incident basis. It would not aggregate the driver's information and violations. Second way would be through a third-party, lack of a better term, data mining company that takes your information and data and accumulates it by the drivers who are currently on your system. But PSP is solely for hiring purposes, not for company review purposes.
Thank you very much, Doug. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Next one, can carriers access a DIR for prospective owner-operators too? And if yes, is it recommended that the consent form be changed to reflect this?
My understanding is that they can, although I would verify that with PSP before doing so. But my understanding would be that any driver who is taken on to operate, if that driver is going to operate under your DOT number, would either yourself or the alternative would be to have the owner-operator obtain their own DIR. That way there's no question in that capacity. And I think it is a good idea with regard to any driver who is prospectively going to be driving under your DOT number to be able to review a DIR for that individual. But my understanding is yes, that if you're taking an owner-operator on a lease basis, you can obtain a DIR for that driver with their consent.
Thank you, Doug. And while I get to the last question, do we have a slide with contact information for yourself and KCI? Just so that the audience has it. Thank you, Doug. Last question we have time for. Do we need to have a copy of the PSP in the driver DOT file?
I would say no. I generally recommend that you limit what is in the driver qualification file to those items specified in the regulations. The PSP is not specified in the regulations, and again, it's not required to be obtained by a carrier. So I would suggest that it not be included in the DQ file. At least it does not have to be included in the DQ file.
Thank you very, very much, Doug. That was a great presentation. We had many, many questions from the audience, unfortunately, just not enough time to get to all of them. But you're welcome to contact KCI Insurance. Ron Cooperman's contact information is on your screen, as well as Doug Marcello from Marcello & Cavisto, and Doug's contact information is on your screen as well. We thank all of you for being here with us today. We thank KCI Insurance for sponsoring this webinar, and we especially thank Doug Marcello for his excellent presentation. And we look forward to seeing all of you at future KCI-sponsored web seminars. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.